We're going to talk about 7 of the most important things that you want to consider when buying a country property. 7 things that you want to make sure you potentially have if you're going to buy some kind of land in the country. Hey everybody, Chad Cruiser here with Health and Homestead. And if you want to learn more about country living, raising your own provisions and food, hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell and hit all. That'll help you get all the videos that are coming up. So the first thing that you want to consider, I would say the most important thing to have on your property is number 1, a good water source. And you may think, yeah, that's obvious, and it is, but some people may overlook that and they think, oh man, I just found a great property in Arizona and people in the area just have the water delivered. Hey, if you're living in that kind of situation and you're fine with it, more power to you. Hope it works out well for you. But you're losing out on one of the most important parts of independence. The Bible even says, actually, interestingly, in the book of Proverbs, the book of wisdom there, chapter 5, verse 15, it talks about having waters out of your own cistern and waters out of your own well. That's interesting that in looking at the wisdom of the centuries, that's one of the things that's suggested, is to make sure to have your own water source, if at all possible. And by doing that, we drilled our own well on this property. I'm so glad we did. It ended up being fantastic water. It tastes great. And there's just a sense of freedom knowing that you have your own water source. Number 2, now I would say potentially the second most important thing to have on your property, if you're looking to buy some land or an already established homestead, is do you have at least some form of usable soil or soil that can be worked until it is usable. And there's many things you can do. I mean, if you have clay soil, there's things you can work into it. It's going to be a lot of work. If you have super sandy soil, there's things you can do. It's going to be a lot of work. Most properties don't end up having phenomenal soil. There are certain regions of the country that do, some of the Pacific Northwest, the flatland areas, beautiful soil there in places like Iowa. But many parts of the country either end up having rocky soil, clay-filled soil, or sandy soil. But still, in most of these places, there's something you can do. But some places are just so filled with rocks, or it's just pure clay. It's really hard to work with. Consider what kind of soil it has, but having some area, either that already tillable land or a garden area that's big enough to grow a good chunk of your own produce, and ultimately it'd be nice to have an area that's large enough to grow all of your own food if you needed to, or if you got to that point, if times got very difficult, which, by the way, evidently they're going to. I don't know when, but sooner or later it is going to happen. I mean, the Bible even talks about it, so we don't know when. I'm not here to say that I know when at all, but having these things prepared, both your water and an area to grow food, these are 2 of the most important things to have on the property that you're looking to buy. Number 3, another thing to think about when you're moving to the country, the third thing that I'm sharing at least, is you need to know about the restrictions on the land that you're looking at. Maybe you're a person who you like living in a restricted area because that means your neighbors are going to also have immaculate properties that are pristine in every way. And if that's what you're looking for, more regulations can actually be beneficial to you. And you'll probably also need more money in a situation like that to be able to keep everything up perfectly. And there are other areas that have no regulations whatsoever. You can basically do whatever you want to do. And you think, man, that sounds great. And it is in many ways. But it also means your neighbor can do whatever they want to do. I was looking at a piece of property, beautiful area of the country, what I consider to be one of the most beautiful spots in the entire nation, and looking at a property that I could afford, and got talking to the person who owned the land adjacent to it, and he also had land that had no regulations. And so he told me, as I was thinking about buying the property, he said, oh, I'm thinking of getting some hogs on here, and I knew what he was saying was, hey, I'm uphill from you, my hogs are going to be here, it's going to be nasty, you don't want to move next to me. And you'll probably never get hogs. But that was kind of a little way of saying, I don't want you to buy the property next to me. And so what I'm saying is this: if you have no regulations, so does your neighbor. Often what happens is, so you have, in those cases, not always, but people have a lot of trash in their yard and things that you may not love to be around, but you can build however you want. You can build very cheaply. You could build a tiny house. You could put a single wide mobile home, so it could be very cheap. So that's one of the benefits, but that is also one of the liabilities of the property, is that there are no regulations. And just like I mentioned, things like tiny homes, in most parts of the country, you can't legally have a tiny home on a property. I'm not saying you want to or don't want to buy a tiny house or have a tiny house, but I'm just letting you know that you need to know about the restrictions before you go into a property. Now, if you're buying a pre-established homestead with a house and outbuildings and everything, it is what it is at that point. But for somebody else who's looking to buy and build, you want to know about the regulations in the specific township or community, or specifically the piece of land that you're buying. You need to know that. It's extremely important. So let's go on to number 4. Now, the fourth thing that is very important is, can you handle the climate of the region you're looking to move into? Now, some people really struggle in the south because they feel like it's too hot. Other people struggle in the north because they just say, man, I just can't handle those frigid winters. And so it's not that one area is perfect and one area isn't. Some people can't handle the heat, some people can't handle the whole cold. So you need to decide, what are you like? What can you handle? Now, you go to some of the really cold regions, it's going to be cheaper in general. And that's something to consider, but you need to find out, do you like it? Now, you might be thinking, man, it isn't, you'd think that it's healthier to live in warmer weather, but evidently some of the longest living people live in Scandinavia, which is a cold northern region of Europe. And so it's not necessary that you have to live in the south to have health and longevity. They've done very well in Norway, Sweden, in these countries. Even Iceland has a quite a bit of longevity to it. So it's, the temperature isn't going to necessarily give you your health. There might even be something about the hardiness of being from the cold weather. But either way, what can you handle? I find that I do live in the cold. Even, I don't see the snow right now, but just 3 minutes ago, there was a little bit of snow as I've been doing this video. And what I have found is that one of the ways to deal with the cold weather, and obviously it's not too bad yet, we don't even have any snow, but is simply to get out in the weather regardless of what it's like. You may have heard the saying that there's no bad weather, there's just bad clothing. Well, I think that's a lie. Now, there is bad weather, right? But it is true that learning to dress correctly can make bad weather less bad, right? I mean, it can make it livable and bearable. So just figure out what you can handle and make sure to live in an area that you can actually deal with the weather that's in that area. A very important fifth point, maybe to consider, is the property accessible? Now, I talked about this in the last video, but I want to give you some other aspects of accessibility. Now, I don't only mean legal access. In the last video, we talked about some things you absolutely want to avoid if you move to the country, and that is inaccessible properties, properties that don't have legal deeded access to the property. You don't have some kind of right of way to even get on your property, but that's not what I'm talking about as much here. I also want you to consider, can you get to the property year-round? We have looked at, because my wife and I, we haven't had tons of money, so we've looked at all kinds of properties all around the country, and often the cheapest properties are the ones with the worst access. What do I mean? You go to areas where you drive down a dirt road, then you turn down another dirt road, and then another, and then you're on a 2-track, and it just gets worse and worse, and then you have to drive through a creek bottom, and you're literally driving through the creek, and finally you get to the property. And now, you may have heard the old saying, God willing and the creek don't rise, or Lord willing and the creek don't rise, meaning you say, oh, I'll see you on Tuesday, Lord willing and the creek don't rise, because you had to live across the creek, and if the creek was up, well, you just simply didn't go. And there are still plenty of properties, cheap properties out in the country like that, and I guess in those situations, you just have to accept, well, if the creek don't rise, I'll be able to go where I gotta go, but if not, I'm just not gonna be able to make it where I need to go. And so accessibility is important. And I had another experience where I was looking at what I consider to be the most beautiful property, the greatest property I've ever found. And it was not a giant property, it was 10 acres, and it was completely surrounded by national forests. Some people say, hey, don't ever do that. You might have eminent domain troubles. You might have eminent domain troubles anywhere. You see people who live in the city and they want to put a highway in and they say, hey, we want your property, and you say no. They say yes, you say no, and well, sooner or later, they're going to get the property. And so you can have that happen anywhere. But some people say avoid being next to the national forest because of that. To me, if at some point the government wants your land, they're going to get it one way or another. You might hold off for a little, you might get a little extra money, but in the end, you might not. So if they ever wanted my land, I'd finally say, all right, as long as I can get whatever I'd get on the market or whatever, or a little more, I'd move. What do you do? I mean, it is what it is. That's the government. You can't really fight the government very well, but that's beside the point. So I was looking at this incredible property and had a beautiful spring, and it was also had a beautiful creek on it. It had enough land to get your trees, for burning for wood and for your heat and everything, and it was just a great property. And as the realtor looked at it with me, he said, the only trouble is you're not going to be able to get here half the year. He said there's going to be snow on the ground and you're not even going to be able to make it to your property. Well, beautiful, great property, but if it's inaccessible, well, it is what it is. And so you've got to accept that. So make sure that you're going to be able to get access to your land and to your house year-round in some capacity, whether that means you go and buy an old pickup truck with a plow on the front or whatever it is, but making sure that you have access to your property, that's extremely important. And number 6, it is making sure that wherever you go, you are able to have work. Now, in the times that we're living right now, many people are able to work from home on a computer. Well, even if you can work on a computer, you want to make sure that you have internet access. Secondarily, if you don't work from a computer, you need some kind of work, whether it's something practical, whether you're felling trees or whether you do construction, whatever it is, or, you're in the medical field. There's jobs almost everywhere for the medical field, but here's the thing, you need to consider, does this area have work that you can actually make a living on? And one of the reasons I say this is because if the further out you get, land gets cheaper. So you think, oh, this is great, the poor folk can move further out. Maybe, but if they can't find work, then that kind of makes it inaccessible. So that's something to really, really consider. Are you able to make a living? And you don't want to just run off and be crazy and move out into the country when you have no means of finances. So can you get a job? Can you have work in the region you're in? I've said this before, if you're willing to work hard, almost anywhere you can go, there is labor. If you're willing to be a hard worker, you're willing to learn a trade or, work under somebody, they teach you how to do the work, you can find a job almost anywhere, but make sure you can find that work before you go to the area. Now, number 7 is especially important if you live in the north. Are there enough trees on the property for you to be able to take down the dead trees and use them to heat your house? Or is there some way to heat your house? Now, keep in mind, I've talked about this before, that things like solar power, you don't heat your house with solar power. Now, having passive solar can be very helpful, but you don't actually use solar power unless you had an insane amount of panels. People don't heat their house with solar. So if you live in the north and you're not heating with either electricity, propane, natural gas, or some form of heating, you have to use wood, and you want to have enough wood. I have a whole video on how much land do you need. How much land do you need if you move to the country to be self-sustaining? And if you want to see that video, it's going to be right here. You don't want to miss how much land do you need to be self-sustaining. So if you want to see that, click here. Now, if you like this video, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, share it with your friends. God bless and have a fantastic